Okay, there's still a few people joining here. You're all very welcome this afternoon. It's lovely to see so many people here for this lecture. Most of all, welcome to Vittorio Bufacchi, our speaker.
Hello, everyone.
Let more people in here. Today is the first day of our summer school, and I'm delighted to welcome you here, whether you're at the summer school or you've just joined us. It's very good to see you. This is our first lecture of 2024, and I'm very excited and very pleased to introduce Dr. Vittorio Bufacchi. Vittorio is senior lecturer now correct me if I'm wrong, senior lecturer in the philosophy department at University College Cork. In Ireland, and he did his PhD at the London School of Economics. He has lived in the UK or Ireland since 1988 and has held academic positions, wait for this, at Yale, University of Colorado, Dartmouth College in the US, University of Manchester, and University College Dublin before settling on sunny Cork. So Vittorio's most recent publication is Why Cicero Matters. Here's my copy. Why Cicero Matters, and Vittorio is going to answer that question for us today. So I'll pass over to you, Vittorio. I should also say Vittorio is going to take questions afterwards. So during the talk, if you have any questions, if anything comes to mind, do type it out into the chat for us. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, Helen, can you put up the PowerPoint?
I will. Sorry. Bear with me.
And
one thing I had not done.
hopefully it will work. Technology is always what it is. But if not, we can live without it. Cicero lived without it. So there we go. Excellent.
There we are.
Okay, so I should be able to move it. Let me see.
Can you? Do you want to tell me to advance the slides?
I should be able to, shouldn't I? Let me see.
Please don't say next slide, please.
Sorry, say that again.
Oh, did you do that or did I? Oh, that was me. Sorry, that was me.
So I should be able to do that. Okay, so let me see if I'm Oh.
Well, look, Vittorio, you just give me a nod when you want it advanced
Right.
to the next one.
Sure. Okay, we'll do that. You know, we've been using Zoom for lectures for quite a while now, and it always brings up issues. Yeah, anyway, I think we'll start. So, welcome everyone. So the title is slightly different from my book. It's Why Read Cicero Today. Now, as you can see, I teach in a philosophy department, okay? So I'm not a classicist. My Latin is very poor, but I come to it from a philosophical perspective, and I think that's quite important for reasons that you will see later on. That's my email, and after the lecture, feel free to email me if you want to keep this conversation going. Right. So why read Cicero today? There are two issues here. One is the Cicero part, but the other one is the today part. You know, why Cicero today? So let's have the next slide.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
There we go.
There you go. So this is possibly controversial, and I don't expect everyone necessarily to agree with me, but in terms of what is happening today, both in Europe and globally is that there is a very serious surge of the far right. And we're talking about the far right here. We're talking about not just a conservative versus a center-left. This is the far right. And we've seen it in Europe, notwithstanding the results coming out from Paris this morning, you cannot deny that there is a surge of that far right. And that is very much the context in which we're living. Okay, so next slide, please. Right, so, and I'm not going to spend much time on this, but it's kind of important that we have a minimum definition of what we mean by the far right. So it's a style of politics that is authoritarian by definition. And part of that authoritarianism means a recognition of a hierarchy, which is both social and political. And whenever you have hierarchy, you are questioning the value of equality. And that's very much part of the far right. It's also populist, and part of that populism is a strong nationalism, but populism is also the method of engaging with politics. And one of the things that also characterizes the far right is that there is a political project to reform the constitutions, liberal constitutions as we know them, undermining the checks and balances, the separation of powers. We've already seen that in places like Hungary. It is occurring in places like Italy today, and it may be occurring in other places. Okay, so that is the question about, that's where we are today. And so, next slide, please. The question is, well, why Cicero? Is it possible that reading a philosopher all the way back in ancient Rome can actually help us or even be relevant to what is going on today? So that's in a sense the challenge they were posing, right? So next one, please. And the challenge is quite considerable, right? Because to 2024 today, and we're looking at someone who's, excuse me, whose major works were written in 44 BC. So in what sense can we actually go back and read someone from 2000 years ago and expect that to be relevant to us today? Right, so next one. There are two possible ways in which we can answer this question. What does it mean to explore current affairs through the lenses of ancient Rome? There's a lot of that. A lot of people do that. And I think there is a right way of doing it and a wrong way of doing it, right? So one possible answer is, okay, these are great philosophers. Yes, they're all men. Yes, they tend to be white. Yes, they're certainly all dead. But we can learn from them because they, because there is something about reading their work and which will bring up a new way of looking at politics. So you mine their writings and you're looking for those gems of wisdom, and as if you can just take them and transport them to the current context. And there are a lot of people who do that. And again, coming from a philosophy department, there are a lot of people who think all the answers are to be found in Plato or Aquinas or Aristotle. So are the answers to be found in Cicero? Right, next one. This is not the way that I'm going to answer that question. I think this is the wrong way of using the ancients. Next one, please. So there's another way of answering the question, and this is what I'm going to suggest. There is a distinction between an idol and an exemplar. The idol is a way of reducing something complex to an image, and for those, the prefix id, which means image. Also, the word ideology comes from it. Okay, so an idol is someone who demands total adoration and reverence. You don't question their position. And the idol is there, it's got all the answer. The other way of thinking about it is as an exemplar. And this is where you learn from someone in the past. They're historical figures. They speak to us, but you engage with them. You engage with them critically. You don't have to agree with everything they say. You take a good pinch of salt. And so, yes, they're there. They have useful things to say, but we don't idolize them, right? And this is the way I think we should be looking at Cicero. He's an exemplar. He's not an idol. Okay, so let's move forward. Or rather, let's go backwards. So we go back to 44 BC. 15th of March, the Ides March. This is where Julius Caesar was assassinated in the plot in the Senate, right? And this is very much this is a turning point in ancient Rome. It's a turning point in world history. And I think what is really important here is the fact that we have a moment in history which has repercussions to this day today. Now, why? Because, and I'm going to return to this in a moment, that far right, that is very much part of what is going on today, they do have a role model, and Julius Caesar is that role model. It is very much their idol, right? What happens on the 15th of March? Everyone knows what happens on the 15th of March. There is this plot against Julius Caesar. Brutus and the others get together. There's multiple stabbing of Julius Caesar. What happens next? Now, I take it, this is what historically we believe happened next, right? You have, and remember that politics in ancient Rome was done in the public. It was done in the forum. It was done in an open space. So you have the Roman people there, and there was a moment of panic, but quiet and silence, because no one saw this coming. And Brutus turns around to the Roman people. He stands up. He takes the dagger, which is still drenched in Julius Caesar's blood. And what does he say? What words come out of his mouth in that defining moment in history, right? And you can imagine, he could say, down with the dictator. And dictator was actually the title that Julius Caesar had. He could have said, this is for freedom, this is for Rome. He doesn't. He turns to the Roman people and says, Cicero, Cicero, right? No one is more surprised than Cicero himself, because he had nothing to do with this plot. But why? Why does Brutus name Cicero in that moment? And that's because there is a sense in which he represents something. He represents the Roman Republic. And the Roman Republic, now there's a lot of stories and a lot of books that that always put the best dress on when it comes to Roman history and the Roman Republic. It was far from being ideal for all sorts of reasons. It was a slave society, right? So let's not idealize slavery. The system was built and functioned on slavery. Women did not have the same rights as men. They could not have the full citizenship as men. There was spectacular inequality and a great deal of violence. So it was by far was not a utopia. But 2,000 years ago, the Romans came up with a political system which was not based on a monarchy. And the monarchs at the time had absolute power. And instead, this experiment of the Roman Republic was an attempt to have a system which, by all appearances, is very much like our democracy. A system based on election, a system based on citizens, right? So when you have a monarchy, the people are the subjects to the king. In a republic, the people are citizens, they have citizenship, and that brings rights to the people. Well, I mean, how remarkable. A system of checks and balances that we still use today, a system with the Senate, which we still use today. So there were, and this Roman Republic lasted for almost 500 years. That is remarkable. And it came to an end with Julius Caesar, which is why there was an attempt to bring this dictatorship to an end. It didn't work. We know it didn't work. Afterwards, we have the emperors, but they were just dictators by another name. That experiment ended. Now, we're kind of, and this is where I think that today is important, because today we risk taking our democracy for granted. Our democracy, a liberal democracy, is under attack. And what happened on the 6th of January, 2021 is something that we should never forget. So our democracy is not even 100 years old in Europe. It can come to an end, just like the Roman Republic did. So there is that moment in history, and Cicero represents, both in terms of his politics and his philosophy, the Republic, the system of procedures, of the rule of law rather than the rule of a person, a man. Okay. So, sorry. Next slide, please. So I think it's the one way in which we appreciate Caesar is by comparison to Julius Caesar and what Julius Caesar represented at the time, which is a dictatorship that brings to an end a republic, versus someone whose whole life, philosophically, politically, was about defending the republic. Right. Thank you. Next one. So Julius Caesar certainly was an idol, and he for the next many centuries, and still today, he represents a role model for a certain type of politician, authoritarian politician, what today we might call a far-right politician. Right. Next, please. Where, why is it that Julius Caesar, and when you consider the Julius Caesar for what he did in the Gaul, what he did in what today is France and Germany, well, historians refer to it as a genocide. He brought the end of the Roman Republic. He brought the end, he said, why do we idolize a dictator? We could blame Julius Caesar, amongst others, because he wrote one of the most beautiful, not only plays about Julius Caesar, but Mark Antony gets one of the most beautiful speeches ever. Yes, and Napoleon idolized Julius Caesar. Caesar, yes, indeed. To the best of my knowledge, but I'm not a French historian, but as I recall, yes, that's certainly the case. So next slide. And Julius Caesar is still, even in terms of more contemporary forms of entertainment. How many films have been made on Julius Caesar? This is the one with Marlon Brando, right? Marlon Brando here plays Mark Antony, and I gave you the link there where he gives that. Marlon Brando used to be a remarkable actor, apart from being a very beautiful actor, and this is all building up to this idea of Julius Caesar as a great, the great injustice of having murdered this great person, this great leader. Next one, please. And this is another example. If people are opera buffs, Handel wrote this opera, 1724, Julius Caesar in Egypt. And again, Julius Caesar, I won't read this, but, they bring him the head of Ptolemy, and he's shocked because he was so cruel. He says it's pitiless. There's no place for mercy. And this is again, building up this idea of Julius Caesar as a very fair leader, always with mercy. And that's just not the case, right? So how did this happen, right? So next one. So we have this image of Julius Caesar through the centuries, and there are many examples. I've just given a couple. And what about Cicero? And Cicero is pretty much kind of the forgotten man of ancient Rome. So next one, please. So how did that come? So one, if we try to sort of pinpoint, when did the share prices of Cicero start go down? Well, Theodor Mommsen has a lot to do with it. He's a German scholar. You probably came across him. He wrote the history of Rome at the end of the 1800s. Extremely influential. It became the official account of the history of Rome. And next slide. And he is scathing on his judgment on Cicero. Statements without insight, idea, or purpose. Cicero was never more than a short-sighted egotist. He calls him a coward. And then he even says, people refer to him as an author, and here is his more philosophical work. And he says, it's by nature a journalist. Why be so critical? Well, there was a political project here because at the time in Germany, the unification of Germany, it was the idea of we need the one strong leader. And again, we need a Julius Caesar. We don't need a Cicero. Next one, please. And while it's not so strong, in more contemporary work, David Stockton, in his work on Cicero, political biography, he talks about Cicero as the politician. And then Stockton says, well, of course, he also wrote stuff in philosophy, which is insignificant. The political Cicero and the philosophical have nothing in common. In fact, the philosophical stuff is really not important. Actually, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. Next slide, please. So this is, some of you may have seen this. This was aired in the BBC last year, September, October last year. It was a 3-episode, very well done. They called them docudramas on Julius Caesar. And remember that Julius Caesar and Cicero were contemporaries. There's only 6-year difference between them. Cicero was born in 106 BC, Julius Caesar in 100 BC. So their lives were very much in a parallel. In this making of a dictator, they're somewhat critical of Julius Caesar. Cicero is not mentioned at all until halfway through the 3rd episode. again, why is it that Cicero always gets forgotten? Right. So next one, please. So in fairness, there has been a little bit of a revival of interest in Cicero. Next one, please. But mostly this occurs in departments of classics, which is, and some of the work is fantastic. Gesine Manuold and Catherine Tempest in particular, very good works. But unless you are teaching in a classic department, you may never have come across them. Next one, please. The only exception are those 3 novels by Robert Harris, which I would strongly recommend. Robert Harris, who's a bestseller sort of writer, he wrote a fictionalized history of Cicero, which is beautifully written and historically accurate. And I would actually say that Robert Harris is one of the reasons why Cicero is becoming better known. Okay, thank you. So why does Cicero matter? Let me give you 3 reasons, and I'm conscious of the time, so we'll move swiftly on. Next one, please. First of all, as I said, there is this resurgence of the populist far right. Now, some of you may recognize the painting. Next one, please, which hangs in the Senate in Rome, and that's taken from a painting of Cicero addressing the Senate during the controversy with Catilina. Now, that was a man who organized a coup against the Roman Republic, and in particular against Cicero in 63 BC, when Cicero had made it as a consul. And Cicero managed to find out about this plot against the state, and Catilina was killed, and then the people that were behind the plot and worked with Catilina were taken to the Senate, and there was we won't go there because we don't have time today. But the question was, what are we going to do with these people? How do we punish those who rise against the state? There's a famous speech that Cicero gave in the Senate against Catilina. And for those of you who study Latin, you may have come across this before. Quasque tandem abutere Catilina patientia nostra. It's a beautifully written and beautifully powerful speech, against this man who came from a very rich family, who could not accept the fact that Cicero, who actually was a new man, he didn't come from one of the rich Roman families, managed to have a political career more successful than himself. The next one, please. Now, this is Hungary in 2012. And there was an attempt by the far-right government at the time to change the constitution in such a way that the executive would have more power and taking away power from the judiciary. And you had a man in a protest in Budapest with this sign, Quasque tandem. That is the beginning of that speech by Cicero. And how remarkable that speech and those words of Cicero were being used in 2012 in Hungary in a very, in a similar, very similar context. All right. So next, that's just to say, the words. But this is the thing about the populists in ancient Rome. Catilina played that card. Claudius Pulcher played that card. Julius Caesar was a populist. So there were a wave of attempts at undermining the Roman Republic during Cicero's time. Next one, please. And so he had experience of dealing with the populists, with authoritarian populists. So he is someone that we might actually look to because, in a sense, he experienced something very similar to what we are experiencing today. Next one, please. And in what I would consider to be Cicero's most important text, the Offices, which translates as On Duties, which he wrote in 44 BC. So everything was happening. So Julius Caesar was killed, and Cicero was writing some of his most important philosophical works, as well as engaging in what to do now with the Roman Republic. And he says, many people come to forget all about justice once they start longing for military command, political office, or glory. And this is a recurring theme. And this is the thing about populism and the far right and the challenge that they pose, because these are people who are interested in glory, in political office. They're not interested in the justice of the system. And the Roman Republic, with all its faults, it had a constitution. I mean, how remarkable. 2,000 years ago, there was a rule of law defined by a constitution. Right. Next one, please. The second point is our duties as citizens. And this is kind of important because often people think that it's all about the politicians. Actually, Cicero turns it around and says, in a republic, you as citizens, you have responsibilities. You can't just blame everything on the politicians. So the idea that as a citizen, you have rights, but also duties. So next one, please. And I go back to the Offices, and he says, and this is to simplify something that is quite complex, there are two duties, overarching duties that we have as citizens. The first one is to seek out the truth and be truthful. And the second one is to uphold the structure of justice. So next one, please. If you think about seeking out the truth, right? One of the things that defines populism today is this post-truth epidemic. This is from The Economist. 1/3 of Americans deny climate change exists, right? So there's a denial, and a lot of those populist systems are based on this idea of a post-truth, this idea that truth doesn't matter anymore. And you go back to Cicero 2,000 years ago, and he's saying that we have a duty to truth, but it's not only a duty to believe in truth, but a duty in seeking out the truth. And seeking out actually requires work. Some people denied the Holocaust. Absolutely. People denied all sorts of things. They denied the Holocaust. They denied COVID-19, which is shocking. But that is actually what is happening. And seeking out the truth means that actually you have to invest time and effort in the truth, which is what Cicero was telling us. And how quickly we forget, how quickly we just go, we believe the first thing we see on Twitter or Facebook. And I asked my students, and these are, third-year students who chose to study philosophy at university. And I asked them, guys, where do you get your news from? More than half of them said, oh, social media. Whoa. So, and then the second point, to preserve, next one, please. To preserve and uphold the structure of justice. And this is a duty that we have. So we have a right to vote, which some people can't even be bothered to do. But we also have a duty to do something about it. So next one, please. And I think this is two of the things that I find extremely powerful in terms of Cicero's political philosophy. And this is from his text, The Republic. And of course, the Roman constitution was based on a mixed constitution. And he says, well, what's important about this constitution is that in the first place, a widespread element of equality, which free men cannot long do without. So he says, you can only have a system, well, today we would call it democracy, if we take equality seriously. And of course, that is one of the problems with the far right. They start from an assumption of social hierarchies, political hierarchies, and no. And then he says, nothing can be sweeter than liberty. Of course, the Republic is all about the freedom from the monarchy. And then he says, yet, if it isn't equal throughout, it isn't liberty at all. And you find this idea in Montesquieu, in other contemporary philosophers, liberty without equality is not liberty. You cannot have liberty by itself. You can only have liberty, it's if we're all equally free that liberty has a value. And I find this kind of important because this egalitarian aspect of Cicero's philosophy is something that has gone under the radar, even by scholars of Cicero's work. But I think it is an important lesson because one of the things that is making this rise of the far right possible is that we have created a very inegalitarian society. So next one, please. And this is also from the Republic. Money, name, and property, if divorced from good sense, lapse into total degradation. But the next bit is what I find really, really modern. There is no more degenerate kind of state than that in which the richest are supposed to be the best. And when you consider some of the people that are running for office, often they tend to be the richest. That was the case in ancient Rome. And Cicero realized that that was a problem. And we are reproducing that same system today. And because they're rich, we assume that they are the best. And there's nothing more degenerate. I mean, how powerful. Next one, please. And then he talks about the motivations, what brings people to undermine a system such as the Republic. The reason why people commit injustice is to obtain something they desire, and then it specifies that greed is manifest in such cases. I mean, that idea that it's... Now, greed here for Cicero has a double meaning. It's greed in terms of power and greed in terms of money, right? We tend to use that word greed in terms of riches. He uses it both in terms of riches, you want the money that comes with power, but you also want that power and being greedy for power. And that is the motivation behind injustice, which I find still an important lesson. So next one, please. And finally, what I would say, Rome needs philosophy, and we also need philosophy. So next one. And this is an important, and I'm not going to say too much about this, but there's a really interesting and aspect about Cicero the politician and Cicero the philosopher. And what they have in common is the importance of philosophy. And this is a recurring theme with Cicero, because his argument is that one of the best things that we can do in terms of teaching people about the value of democracy is teaching people how to do philosophy. Because the way that philosophy works best is as follows. it's a dialogue. Philosophy is where everyone has a voice, where we can learn from everyone else, which is why historically philosophy was written as dialogues, and Cicero's texts are dialogues. And they're very important. They're very egalitarian dialogues, because often you actually you're not sure which of those voices is Cicero's voice. And democracy is a dialogue. It's a democracy only works when I have my opinion, but I'm open to change it, and I'm listening to you, and I'm prepared to learn from you, and I'm prepared to change my opinion. And philosophy is about engagement and improvement. It is not a monologue, but that's what you have in a dictatorship. So when Cicero was critical of Julius Caesar, he was critical of this idea that, well, why do you think you got all the answers? Because in philosophy, no one has all the answers. It's a joint effort. And so one of the things that people don't realize about Cicero is that he realized that philosophy was so important. And then he realized that people in Rome couldn't do philosophy because actually the philosophy was all written in Greek. And of course, the Romans, the working class people, didn't read Greek. And he translated Greek philosophy in Latin. And a lot of the Greek philosophy we have today survived because of Cicero through a translation in Latin. And he was doing it because he truly believed that each and everyone has a voice that needs to be heard. And the method of philosophy is the method of democracy. And I think that's extremely powerful. Right. So I'm going to bring this to an end. Why Cicero today? How can someone who lived 2,000 years ago be relevant? Why Cicero in particular? Next one, please. And I'll go back to this idea. Cicero is not an idol. He is an inspirational exemplum. He's an exemplar. And the thing about Cicero is that we don't just agree with everything he says. He doesn't have all the answers. But what we do is that we learn to think with Cicero. And the beauty of reading Cicero's work is actually about the thinking. And thinking itself is an ethical practice. Thinking itself is the antithesis of populism. And the wonderful thing about Cicero is that he was a politician and a philosopher, and he's combining the two, and he was thinking his way through these problems, which is exactly what we need to do, and which is why I think we need to go back to Cicero, because we need to learn from him. So next one, please. And this is very quickly. I kept talking about the Republic, right? The word he uses is res publica. And this can be translated in different ways. Res publica usually is translated as the public thing, the public property. The next one, please. And Cicero has 4 words that captures this idea. Res publica, res populi. The public thing is the people's property. It's the people's thing, is the public thing. And this is reinforced in the fact that this thing that you and I would call democracy, this republic, it is ours. But if it is our property, we actually have a responsibility in terms of its ownership, because it's our thing. And we can't just, we have and this goes back to this idea of duties. But the public thing is the people's thing. It's our thing. It's our property. I think it's actually still such an important lesson that we can learn. Okay, so next one, please. Okay, so this is the last quote. For what is a state other than an equal partnership in justice? And again, this idea of equality comes in. So next one, which is just a thank you for listening to me. And maybe the next one and the one after, just to say, when this is shameless self-promotion, everything I've said comes from my book that came out just last October. And I was checking the website, and there's a 30% discount, summer discount at the moment. If anyone is interested, the book is there, published by Bloomsbury in the UK. Right, so thank you very much. Apologies for going over my time, but I hope there is still time for Q&A.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Vittorio.